Some lessons don't come from books. They come from bruises. They come from life.
There is no substitute for experience, period.
Some of the biggest successes were a byproduct of failure.
If you want to learn, build, and grow,
Why not learn from somebody who's already paid the price for success?
the wisdom is in the gray.
This is the Greybeard Show.
Greybeard Show. Learn,
Build.
grow.
And welcome to the show. You're listening to the Greybeard Show. I happen to be Shawn Davis, but I go by Greybeard. And I want to start today with a simple question. And I want you to actually sit with it for a moment, because the quick answer and the honest answer are usually two completely different things when it comes to this particular subject. When, here's the question, when is the last time you really listened to the way you talk about yourself? Not the public version, not what you say when someone asks how you're doing and you say, good, busy, hanging in there. I mean the private stuff, the running commentary underneath everything, the things you say in the car alone, when there's no performance required and nobody's watching, the sentences you finish the same way every time without even thinking about it, the things you mutter when something goes sideways in your life, the voice that shows up late at night when the world gets quiet and you're alone with your own thoughts and there's nothing between you and the truth of how you actually feel about where things stand in your life. Most people have never really examined that language. And I mean that seriously. They've looked at almost everything else: their diet, their finances, their habits, their business strategy, their relationships. They've read the books, listened to the podcast, done the workshops. But the words they speak over themselves every single day, those run completely unchallenged. And they are doing more to shape the direction of a person's life and limit it than almost anything else I can point to. So here is the frame I want you to carry through this entire show. The words you speak about yourself are not descriptions of your reality. They are the construction of it. They are not the report on the building. They are the blueprint. And here's what is fundamentally true about blueprints. The building has no choice but to follow them. This is how construction works. The concrete doesn't argue with the plans. The steel doesn't improvise either. Whatever the blueprint specifies, that is what gets built every time without exception. Now take that and lay it directly over your daily life. When you say, and I'm using language I've heard from real people, hundreds of them across years of this work. When you say, I'm just not good with money. Let's take that for example. I'm just not good with money. You're not making an honest observation about your financial history. You are drawing a line on a page. You are handing the construction crew a specification of what you want built in your life. When you say, I've never been able to stick with anything, that is not humble self-awareness about your patterns. That is a load-bearing wall going into the blueprint of your life. When you say, that's just how I am, about your temper, your fear, the ceiling you keep running into in your life, the pattern you cannot seem to break no matter how hard you try, you are not describing something fixed and unchangeable. You are commissioning its continued construction in your life. And the crews show up and get to work every single time. Here's what I really want you to hear. The construction happens. You know, what you're building with your words, what you build with your language, that construction happens in your life, whether you intend it or not. You do not have to be consciously aware of this process for it to be working on you. The blueprint doesn't require your buy-in. It doesn't ask whether you want what you're specifying. It requires only one thing: your repetition through words spoken over your life. Say it enough times with enough consistency, and the brain treats it as a directive, builds it, reinforces it, finds evidence for it in your life everywhere. There's a woman I worked with, I'll keep her name anonymous, who ran a small business. Talented, genuinely driven, capable of considerably more than she was producing. But she had a phrase she used constantly, usually said with kind of a tired, self-deprecating laugh. I'm just not a big picture thinker. That's what she would say. She said it to clients who asked about her vision for the company. She said it to her team when they were looking to her for strategic direction. She said it to herself every time a major decision felt overwhelming. And she had been saying it for so long that it had completely stopped feeling like a belief and had started feeling like a biological fact. Just who she was. Nothing to be done about it. So when we started working together, one of the first things I asked her was, when did you first start saying that about your life? Where did that sentence come from? She had to actually think about it. Eventually, she traced it back to a business partner from years earlier, someone who had been constantly dismissive of her ideas in meetings, who had repeatedly cut her off with, let me handle the strategy, you handle the operations kind of vibe. She had absorbed his language. She had taken his dismissal of her capacity and quietly turned it into her own self-description. And she had been carrying it forward for years as if she had discovered a fundamental truth about herself, when what she had actually done instead was accept a lie someone else told her and started speaking it over herself daily. Here's what I find worth sitting in with that story. She was smart enough to know the phrase was not flattering. If you had asked her directly whether she believed she was incapable of big picture thinking, she would have pushed back immediately. But here's the gap that costs people the most. The distance between what we consciously believe about ourselves in the clear light of day and what we are actually speaking over ourselves in the ordinary unguarded moments of a regular week. The conscious mind holds one belief. The habitual language delivers a different one. And the brain builds what the habitual language tells it to, not what the conscious mind would prefer. So in other words, what you speak over your life repeatedly, you will build, you will call it in, you will make it in your life. You can be remarkably self-aware and still be building the wrong thing because self-awareness operates at the level of deliberate thought, while the blueprint, what you've told yourself over years and years and years, runs at the level of automatic habit. You have to go after the habit. You have to examine the language that runs when you're not paying careful attention. This is where the real blueprint of our lives lives. This is how many of these sentences get started. Not from deep self-knowledge, from a hard season, a dismissive person, a moment of failure that became a permanent label in your life, a word someone spoke over us that we picked up and started speaking over ourselves. We carry them forward because they've been confirmed so many times they feel like reality, because familiarity feels like truth, even when it isn't. I know this from the inside. There was a long season in my own life where the language I used about myself was shaped almost entirely by my worst experiences in life. I had been through real financial devastation, the kind that leaves marks, changes how you sleep, puts your name on documents you never wanted to see. Things I built collapsed in ways that were painful and public. And the language I developed coming out of those seasons felt like wisdom, like the appropriate response of a man who had learned hard lessons and wasn't going to get caught unprepared again. I'm not naive anymore. I'm being careful. I know where certain roads go. But here's what I couldn't see. What I could not see from inside the building was that I was still constructing. I had taken the worst chapters of my story and handed them the blueprint for every chapter that came after in my life. Every new opportunity got measured against what I had already failed. Every possibility got filtered through the lens of my worst season instead of through the lens of what I was actually still capable of. A mentor sat across from me and said something I didn't want to hear. You have confused caution with construction. That's what he said. You think you're being careful. What you're actually doing is building a smaller life than the one you were designed for. And the primary tool you're using is your own mouth. That landed hard because it was true. So here's the first thing I want you to take from this segment. Just an awareness, not a homework assignment. For the next 24 hours, listen to yourself. Not to judge, not to fix, just to actually hear what has been running. Notice the sentences you finish the same way every time. Notice the story you reach for when someone asks why you're not further along in your life or in your business. Notice what you say in private when no performance is required. because you cannot tear down a structure you've never been willing to look at directly. And most people have been so busy living inside the building that they created with their words that they've never once stopped to ask who designed it and what the blueprints actually say. Now, here's where the show turns. Here's where this stops being purely diagnostic and becomes genuinely hopeful. And I mean hopeful in its most grounded and substantive sense. What you built with your words, you can tear down with your words, and then you can build something different. Something actually designed for the life you were made for, rather than the life your worst season suggested you deserved. This is not positive thinking. This is not taping something to your mirror and waiting for the universe to respond. This is the practice of deliberate declaration, deciding with real intention and real consistency what you are going to speak over your life going forward. Not what your history says is safe. What you have decided in the clearest and most honest moments is the direction you're moving. A direct declaration is not a hope or a wish. It's an announcement of what is coming. When the Declaration of Independence was signed, nobody waited for the war to be won before calling the country free. The Declaration came first. It called into being what didn't yet fully exist. And when you begin speaking in the direction of the life you were designed for, with genuine conviction and genuine consistency, your brain starts navigating toward what you've declared. We are going to get into the exact mechanics of how that works in the next segment, but carry this going into the break. You've been building something with your mouth every single day. The question is whether the blueprint matches the life you were made for and want. If it doesn't, and for most people, honestly, it doesn't, you change the plans starting today, starting with the very next sentence out of your mouth. This is the Greybeard Show. Your mouth has been lying to you. Stay with me. There's a lot more where that came from. And if this is hitting home with you, if you'd like to work with somebody that can help you think and articulate a declaration over your life and then hold you accountable to that, then reach out to me. Text Greybeard, Greybeard, text Greybeard to 84503 on your texting app on your smartphone. Key that number in, 84503, then text Greybeard to it, and I'll be in touch. All right, so if you're just joining the show, what we're talking about is your mouth. Your mouth is lying to you. It's telling you things about your life, cementing things, creating blueprints over your life that you never intended just by the way in which you speak about your circumstances, about your potential, about your future, all of that stuff. Your brain is receiving an enormous volume of information every second of every waking hour from your environment, your body, your senses, far more than could ever consciously be processed by it. So the brain runs a filtering system. Its job is to decide what out of everything comes at you actually gets raised to your conscious attention and what gets quietly discarded as irrelevant noise. And what does that filtering system use to make those decisions? It takes its instructions from the beliefs, the stories, and the habitual language patterns you've established about yourself and your life. In simple, plain terms, your brain is constantly searching for evidence of whatever you told it was true about you. Tell it consistently that you're unlucky, and it will surface proof of that everywhere you go. Every setback will get noticed. Every near miss gets registered. Every piece of bad timing gets flagged. While the things that went right, the doors that were actually open, the opportunities that were genuinely available, pass right through your field of awareness without registering at all. Not because bad luck is actually more frequent in your life, but because your brain was told to look for the bad luck in your life because you said, well, good things just don't happen to me. I don't get lucky. Right? It is doing exactly what you trained it to do with remarkable faithfulness. And here is something that, if you let it sink in, should genuinely change how you think about your own experience. Two people can walk through the exact same environment, same city, same economy, same industry, same general resources and circumstances, and have completely different experiences of what is available to them and what is possible for them. One finds opportunities everywhere. The other keeps confirming that things don't work out for people like them. And it's not primarily about intelligence or network or deserving it more. It is about what their brains have been instructed to look for. One brain has been trained to surface possibility. The other has been trained to confirm limitation. Both are operating exactly as they were designed. They are just running very different programs or searches. Let me give you one more story from a different angle, because I think seeing this pattern twice helps it stick in a way one example doesn't. I worked with a woman who was a real estate agent, sharp, hardworking, good with clients. She had a deeply ingrained sentence she said about herself in financial conversations. She said, "I've never been someone who can hold on to money." She said it almost apologetically, like fair warning. And the interesting thing is that in her professional life, helping other people buy and sell property, managing transactions involving significant sums of money, she was meticulous. But the moment the money was connected to her personally, something shifted. She made decisions she would have talked a client out of. She found ways to spend what she had saved. When we traced the sentence back, she found it in a comment her father had made repeatedly during her childhood. Not said cruelly, he was not a cruel man, but said often enough in enough different forms that she had absorbed it completely. She internalized it, and she had been running that search query ever since. Her brain was finding evidence for it everywhere and organizing her financial behavior in ways that confirmed it further. Not consciously, the brain was just doing its job, being consistent with a directive it had been given decades earlier by a man who had no idea what he was setting in motion. When we started working on her language, not with affirmations either, she didn't want to do affirmations, but with honest directional statements about where we were heading, the external world did not change. Same market, same product, same competition. What changed was what she was noticing. Conversations that would have died early that she was staying in. Signals that would have passed right over her normally, she was catching and acting on. They were not doing more. She was just paying attention to the positive. Effectively, she was able to start reprogramming how her brain fed her or filtered information to her. And I want to be honest that this is not a quick transformation. The patterns that have been running in your brain for years do not rewrite in a few days of different language. These grooves can be deep, carved over a long time, and they take real sustained effort to redirect. But the change is measurable. It is available to anyone willing to be consistent, and it begins entirely with the language you use about yourself. So here's the practical work from this segment. 3 things, honest and specific. First, identify what you have been searching for. Write down 3 or 4 things you say about yourself most consistently. Not the polished versions, the raw ones. The things you say when you're tired or frustrated or alone. These are your current instructions to the brain. Look at that list and say this to yourself. This is not a list of facts about who I am. This is a list of search directives I've given to my mind. My brain has been executing them with remarkable loyalty. Second, I want you to ask an honest question about each one. Did I decide this was true, or did I just stop arguing with it at some point? Because there's a meaningful difference between a conclusion you reached deliberately and a label you accepted during a hard season and quietly carried forward ever since. Most limiting self-talk falls into the second category. It was written at a specific point of pain when the evidence in front of you seemed to point one direction. It was an interpretation, not a verdict on your nature, and interpretations can be revisited. Third step here, replace each one with something directional. Not a statement so removed from your current reality that your brain rejects it, but something honest and aimed forward. Not, I am a top producer when you have never been close, but say something like, I am becoming someone who recognizes and develops every single opportunity in front of me. The brain can work with direction even when it cannot yet work with the destination. Give it direction, give it something worth finding, and be consistent enough that the new instructions start to take hold. Your brain is not your problem. It's one of the most capable, most loyal instruments available to any human being. It will work for you with a dedication and precision that should genuinely inspire awe. The only thing standing between you and a brain that is searching for your breakthrough is the search query you've given it to run. Change the query, change what the brain looks for, change what it finds. It really does connect that directly. And it really does start with what comes out of your mouth. One more thing before I go out of this segment. I want to say this because I have watched people hear everything I said and then walk away and do nothing with it. Not because they disagreed, but because it felt too incremental, too small. They wanted a bigger lever of change. I want to tell you clearly, this is the big lever. You're not going to out-hustle a brain that is searching for your limitation. You're not going to out-discipline a filtering system that is wired to confirm your worst story about yourself. Working harder in the same direction with the same internal language is not a strategy. It is stubbornness with good intentions. The only lever that actually changes the search is the language, and changing the language is available to you today. This afternoon, right now, as you hear my voice, the next time you open your mouth to say something about who you are and where you're heading, let's make sure it's positive. Let's make sure it's uplifting. Let's make sure it's structured. You do not have to earn the right to change your language in your mind. You just have to start doing it. If that makes sense to you, if you'd like to learn more, if you'd like to work with a mentor that can help you rewrite that negative story you keep saying in your mind, then text Greybeard, Greybeard, text Greybeard to 84503 on your smartphone. Reach out. I'll respond to every interaction, every call, every text. Text Greybeard to 84503. All right, if you're just joining the show, what we're talking about today is that your mouth has been lying to you. We're talking about how and why the language that you say over your life, about your circumstances, is some of the most important language that you want to monitor, that you could monitor in your life. The language that you speak about yourself over your life is like blueprints that your mind is building. You are building something, constructing something that's either going to cage you or free you. All right. And I want you to read a verse, and I want to ask you to do something harder than it sounds. And I want you to hear it like you've never heard it before, because I think one of the real costs of growing up around church, of living in a culture where certain passages get quoted so often that they become background noise, is that familiarity strips language of its depth, its weight. We hear the words without feeling them. We nod the way you nod at a sign you've driven past 1,000 times without actually reading it. Here's what I want you to hear. This is the verse. This is right out of the Bible, Proverbs 18:21. Death and life are in the power of the tongue. Now just sit with that for a moment. Death and life are in the power of the tongue. The writer does not say that words are important in a general sense. He does not say that communication matters or that you should be thoughtful about what you say to people around you. He says death and life, two of the most final, most absolute, most consequential realities in all of human existence, are in the power of the tongue. He is assigning to human speech a creative and destructive capacity that is almost staggering when you let the full weight of it land on you. And he says it without any qualification, not sometimes, not under the right spiritual conditions. Death and life are in the power of the tongue. Full stop. Now, let me ask you something I want you to take seriously and not rush past. If you actually believed that verse, Proverbs 18:21, death and life are in the power of the tongue, not as a theological position you'd affirm if asked, not as something that sounded true in the right setting, but actually, operationally, behaviorally believed it in your daily life, would you talk about yourself the way you do now? Because here's what I observe consistently. And I say this without judgment because I've lived this and have sat across from hundreds of people who are living it. Most people who claim to be believers of Proverbs 18:21 live as if it applies to everyone except them. They understand instinctively that words spoken over a child carry real weight. They are careful, sometimes genuinely agonizingly careful about what they say to their kids, because somewhere in their gut, they know that a child who gets told often enough that they're not smart, that they're difficult, that they're a problem, eventually stops arguing with those labels and starts living inside them. They get this about their children without anyone having to explain the theology. But when it comes to what they say over themselves in the private reflexive moments, in the habitual language language that runs underneath their daily life, the verse seems to go quiet. They say, I'll never get out from under this and feel no friction with the proverb. They say, I'm just not someone who gets that kind of opportunity. And they call it honest self-assessment rather than death language. They say, I've always been this way, and I'm probably always going to be this way, and file it under self-knowledge rather than under the category the verse actually puts it in. But the tongue does not ask whether you are speaking over yourself or someone else before it does what the proverb says it does. The mechanism is the mechanism. What you have been speaking over yourself in private, habitually, for years, it has been bearing fruit. The question is simply what kind. I want to name 2 ditches this subject has because I've watched sincere people fall into them both, and I want to walk you clearly down the road in between them. The first ditch is what I call the vending machine version. The idea that if you say the right words with enough fervor, with enough, stuff, grit, God is obligated to produce the promised outcome. Put the declaration in, get the breakthrough out. I want to say clearly, this is not what I'm describing, and it is not what Scripture supports. That approach has disillusioned a lot of genuine people who said all the right things and got confused and hurt when the results didn't come in. It treats God as a fulfillment system and faith as a technique for accessing it. I'm not in that ditch, and I'm not inviting you into it either. The second ditch is the overcorrection, because serious, grounded believers have seen the first ditch and want nothing to do with it. They swing so far the other direction that they become almost superstitious about hope. They will not speak anything over their life that hasn't already been materially confirmed because they don't want to seem naive or theologically unsophisticated. They call it being grounded. But a lot of the time, if you look at it honestly, it is fear wearing the costume of faithfulness. It is a life spoken entirely in past tense. No room for declaration. No room for calling things that are not as though they were. No room for the kind of forward-speaking faith that Scripture constantly commands. The road between those ditches is where I want to walk with you today. Here is what speaking life over yourself actually look like in plain and practical terms. First, there's a distinction between a fact and a forecast. If you are currently in debt, that is a present fact, and being honest about it is not death language. It's just accurate. But there is a genuine difference between saying, I am in debt, and saying, I will always be in debt. The first is an honest description of reality. The second is a prophecy about your future. One describes where you are. The other declares where you're going. Speaking life means being truthful about your present situation while firmly refusing to let that present situation write your life forecast for the future. Second, there is catching the verdict language, the permanent, categorical, gaveled down statements. I am a failure. I always end up back at 0. I am not the kind of person who gets to have that. These are verdicts over your life. They carry the finality of a closed case. Speaking life replaces verdicts with direction. Not denying the struggle, not pretending that history isn't real, but building the possibility of genuine change into the sentence itself. I have struggled with this, and I'm actively becoming someone who handles it differently. That is honest. That acknowledges the past without letting the past hold the pen for the future. Thirdly, there is getting the words out of your head and into the actual air, because the proverb is specifically about the tongue, the physical act of speaking. There is something genuinely different, both neurologically and spiritually, about saying something out loud versus just thinking it. The words need to leave your mouth. You need to hear yourself say them. In the morning, before the day gets rolling, before everyone else's demands get their hands on your attention, take a few minutes and speak over your life out loud. In present tense direction, the person you are becoming, the life you are building, the direction you have decided you are moving, not because you've arrived yet, because you have chosen the destination and you are announcing it. Most importantly to yourself, and most importantly to your God. I want to tell you about a conversation I had with someone I was walking with through a genuinely hard season. A season where the finances were bad, the relationship was strained, and the person was carrying more weight than they had language for. They said to me, almost in frustration, "I'm trying to speak life over my situation, but it feels like I'm lying. Everything I say feels fake." I said, "I understand that feeling, and I want to tell you the difference between lying and leading. Lying is saying something you believe to be false. Leading is saying something you've decided is the direction, even before you can fully feel the road. A declaration of your direction is not a lie just because the arrival hasn't happened yet. It is a statement of commitment. It is the announcement of your decision, and your brain does not need you to feel certain before it can begin organizing around the direction you've named. It just needs you to keep naming it. The feeling of certainty follows the consistency. It almost always does, but you have to speak first. Will it feel strange at first? Yes. For most people, it genuinely does. And that strangeness is not evidence that you're doing something wrong. It is evidence that the declaration is new and the groove hasn't been carved yet. You keep going anyway. The groove gets carved through repetition. The conviction follows your consistency, not the other way around. So here's what I've watched happen in real people's lives, including my own. When someone makes a genuine and sustained decision to align what they speak over themselves with what they believe God designed them for, it does not always happen quickly and it does not always look the way they expected, but a movement begins. Something that was invisible becomes visible in their life. A conversation happens that couldn't have happened under the old language. The person who had been walking in agreement with a limiting story about their life starts to walk in a genuinely different direction. And they realize, sometimes with real tears, that the cage was never locked from the outside. It was built from the inside, word by word, for years by them. And the keys were always available. The keys were in their own mouth. Death and life are in the power of the tongue. Not a poetic observation about communication. It's a statement about power you have been exercising every day. The question is not whether you will exercise it. You already are. The question is which one you are calling in, life or death. And it is answered one sentence at a time, beginning with the very next thing you say about yourself. Now, I want to close this segment by saying something to the person who is sitting right now thinking, I've tried this kind of thing before and it did not work. I hear you. And I want to ask you one honest question. Did you actually sustain it? Not for a day or a week when the motivation was high, but for long enough, with enough consistency for a new groove to actually form in your mind. Because most people try this in a burst of inspiration and then fade back into the old language when the inspiration fades. And then they conclude the approach doesn't work. When what actually happened is that the approach was abandoned before it could work. The old language has years of reinforcement behind it in your mind. The new language needs time to build the same. The question is not whether it works. The question is whether you'll be consistent enough and patient enough to let it. Choose wisely. And if this is making sense to you, this is hitting home for you at all, then I'd love for you to reach out. I'm a mentor, I'm a guide, I'm a coach. I've had success, 3 different businesses, 7-figure success. I've been an entrepreneur for almost 40 years. Basically, all that means is I'm really good at problem solving. And so if you'd like a mentor, if you'd like to work with a mentor, then please reach out. You can reach me by texting Greybeard, Greybeard, Greybeard to 84503. Again, text Greybeard to 84503 on your smartphone. All right, if you're just joining us, we're talking about your mouth is lying to you. We're talking about the power of the words that come out of your mouth to shape your life today and in the future. And let me describe someone to you. And I want you to tell me, not out loud, but in the honest part of yourself where the real answers live, whether you recognize this person or not. This person is intelligent, genuinely so. They've done real work on themselves over the years. They've had enough self-awareness to articulate the patterns of their life with real clarity. They know their triggers. They know the tendencies that show up under pressure. They know the relational dynamics that they fall into and the professional habits they can't seem to break no matter how many times they've tried. They can tell you their story from beginning to present with genuine fluency. They know how they got there. They know how they operate the way they do. They know why they operate the way they do. They have a complete, thoughtfully organized account of their life, and they are completely stuck in life. Not because they lack intelligence, they have plenty. Not because they lack self-awareness, they have more than most. Not even because the story they're telling is entirely false. Most of it's true, or true enough that arguing about the facts would miss the point entirely. They are stuck because somewhere along the way, that story stopped being a record of the past and became a prescription for their future. The explanation of where they came from became the instructional manual for where they're allowed to go. The narrative closed around them and they stopped looking for the exit. Not because the door wasn't there, but because the story said there wasn't one. The story became the sentence, and they are serving it faithfully every day. In the decisions they make and the risks they won't take and the version of themselves they allow to walk into a room without ever once pausing to ask whether the sentence was just, whether it was actually deserved, whether the judge who handed it down was qualified. Here's something important to understand about the way the brain relates to the stories we carry. The brain has a deep, almost physical reference for consistency. Once you have built a story about yourself that holds together, once the narrative is established and the internalized and has enough years behind it, your brain works actively to protect it. Not because the story is necessarily accurate, not because it's serving you well, but because consistency feels safe and revision or change feels threatening. Your brain would rather maintain a familiar story, even a painful or limiting one, than undergo the unsettling work of having to build a new story. Coherence is comfortable for your brain, even when the coherence is costing you everything. Simply, in practical terms, this means your limiting story is not sitting quietly in the past. It is actively shaping your present, right now, today, because your brain is constantly recruiting evidence to confirm it. Every experience that lines up with the story gets flagged and reinforced. Every experience that contradicts it gets filtered out or explained away as an exception. After enough years of this, the story feels so thoroughly confirmed that the person living inside it has completely lost the ability to see it as a story. They just call it reality. Here's why the story audit matters so much and why I come back to it with almost everyone I work with. Most people think the obstacle between them and the life they want is external. Let me ask you this question. What is the obstacle between you and your idealized, perfect version of life? What's the obstacle in your mind? What's the first thing that comes to mind? Let me say this again. Most people think the obstacle between them and the life they want is external. It's the economy. It's the timing. It's the resources you don't have, the breaks that didn't come. And sometimes those things are genuinely real. I'm not dismissing the weight of real external obstacles, but in my experience, the most persistent obstacles people face are internal. They are story sentences that have been running so long they feel like external reality rather than internal narrative. The person isn't being held back by the market. They're being held back by the sentence they've always struggled with, which is, I struggle in markets like this. The person isn't being held back by a lack of talent. They're being held back by, I've never been someone who gets recognized for what I actually bring. That's a sentence they say in their mind. When you do the audit and trace a sentence back to where it started, something often shifts even in that moment of tracing. You realize this was not a judicial proceeding. In other words, a judge didn't say, you are this and you're only going to be this forever. This was not a careful, informed, objective evaluation of your nature or your capacity. This was a conclusion you reached during a hard time with limited information from inside a difficult circumstance, and you have been treating it as a permanent verdict ever since. Let me name a few story sentences, common ones that I hear as a mentor and coach. Not to embarrass anyone, but because hearing them listed out loud sometimes creates recognition that abstract explanation doesn't produce. See if any of these feel familiar to you from inside your life. Here's the story. I've always been the kind of person who works hard but never quite breaks through. That's the story sentence. Sounds objective. Is a narrative, one that has been confirmed by a brain doing exactly the search function we talked about in the last segment, and one that will continue to be confirmed as long as it runs unchallenged. I had a really difficult start, and it set me back in ways I've never really fully recovered from. The difficult start may be entirely real and genuinely significant. Never fully recovered is a declaration about your future, wearing the clothing of an observation about your past. Here's another one. I'm great at starting things, but I just can't finish them. Almost certainly written during a specific season where finishing genuinely was hard. That statement carried forward as a permanent identity label long after the season that produced it had passed. Here's another one. People like me don't have that kind of life. This one might be the most damaging of all because it connects personal limitation to group identity in a way that makes challenging it feel not just personally risky, but somehow disloyal to where you came from. None of those are facts. All of those stories are interpretations, conclusions drawn at specific moments, under specific pressures, from inside specific circumstances, and then elevated to permanent truth without ever being seriously cross-examined. They became the sentence, and the person started serving it. So here's the practical work. 3 moves, concrete and honest. The first is the story audit. Write down the sentences that have been running your narrative in your life. The I've always been, I've never been able to, and that's just how I am, those sentences. Write them down without polishing them. Most people have been so embedded inside the story that they never actually looked at it from the outside as an external object. You cannot challenge what you cannot see clearly. So first, get it on paper where you can look at it. Second move is to trace each sentence back to where it started. When did you first say this? What was happening at that time? What were you trying to make sense of when you drew this conclusion? Because almost without exception, when you trace a limiting story sentence about your life to its origin, you find it was written in a hard season, at a point of genuine pain or loss or failure. And in that moment, the conclusion made sense. But you were still living by the verdict rendered in your worst season, and you've never given yourself permission to appeal it from the other side. The season ended, but the sentence stayed. Those are 2 different things. The third move is reauthoring. Not erasing the hard chapters. They're a part of you. They shaped you, and there's often real wisdom in them. But making a deliberate decision about who holds the pen going forward over your life. The old story was written largely by your circumstances, the things that happened to you previously, by what happened in your life, by what you concluded in your hardest moments. Reauthoring, writing the story again, reauthoring is the decision to take the pen back, to say those chapters are behind me. They will always be part of my story, but they do not get to write what comes next. I do. And here's where faith becomes the most practical thing in the world. One of the consistent threads of Scripture is that God has a story about you that is fundamentally different from the one your worst experience has built. His story doesn't begin with your damage. It begins with your design, with the declaration that you were made for something specific and that the capacity to live that out was placed in you deliberately before any of the hard chapters happened and before any of the limiting language got started. His story about you was written before your worst season, and it has not been revised by it. I want to say something about the resistance that comes with this work because it is real and it is predictable, and it tends to show up at the exact moment you try to take the pen back. When you start to challenge a story you've been telling for years, the brain does not go quietly. The same mechanism that has been protecting the story will push back. You will hear things like, "Who do you think you are?" claiming something different. You will feel things like embarrassment, almost a social shame, as if declaring a better story about yourself is a form of arrogance. You will get a voice that sounds remarkably like wisdom saying, "Don't get your hopes up again. You know what happens when you do." I want to tell you this clearly. This is not wisdom. This is the old story defending its lease in your mind. It is the structure protecting itself from the demolition crew. And you have to recognize it for what it is. Not a warning to heed, but a sign that you are actually moving in the right direction. The resistance shows up when the work is real. Expect it. Name it. And keep writing your life anyway. Take the pen back. Start writing something better. If this is landing home for you, you'd like to work with me as a mentor Text Greybeard, Greybeard, to 84503 on your smartphone. So just text Greybeard to 84503 as though it's a cell phone number from somebody you just met. And I'll be in touch. Text Greybeard to 84503. All right, as we close out the show, I want to talk about what a prophet does. I'm not talking about anybody specific that's here with us now. I'm just talking about the concept of a prophet, not the dramatic platform version, not the version you may have seen performed in certain settings, just the basic foundational function. In the simplest, honest terms, a prophet does not primarily predict the future. A prophet declares the future. A prophet takes what they understand to be true at the level of design and purpose and speaks it with authority into the present, calls forward what doesn't yet fully exist, names what is coming as if it's already decided, not from delusion, not from wishful thinking, from settled conviction about what is true at the level of God's design for a person or a people, even when the current circumstances haven't caught up with that truth yet. A prophet speaks the future into the present. That is the function. Now, I need you to hear and understand this about yourself. And I want to say it as plainly as I know how. You are a prophet. You have always been a prophet. You have been exercising this function every single day of your life, whether you knew it or not, whether you intended to or not. Every time you open your mouth and speak about yourself, your future, your capacity, your limitations, your possibilities, you are making a declaration. You are calling something forward. The mechanism I've been describing all day is a prophetic function. You have been prophesying your life. The only question has ever been whether you've been prophesying in alignment with what you were designed for or in alignment with what your worst seasons convinced you was the truth about you and your life and your future. And most people, if they'll be honest for just a moment, have been prophesying their past. Think about the sentences. And I'll always end up back here. Things never really work out for me at the level I'm hoping for. That's prophesying something about your future, right? I'm just not someone who gets to have that kind of life. Those are not observations. Those are not honest reporting about objective reality. They are declarations. They are prophetic utterances, and they've been coming true with a consistency that feels like confirmation of their accuracy, when what actually is a blueprint being followed, a brain running its assigned search, a life conforming to what has been constantly spoken over it. The prophecy comes true because it was spoken by you over your life, not because it was inevitable or deserved. And I want to be clear about something here because the idea can get pulled in a direction I don't intend. I'm not saying that if you just say the right things with enough energy and passion, God is obligated to deliver. We walked through that ditch earlier. That is transactions. That's not faith, and it ends badly. What I am saying is quite different. There is a specific designed, intentional version of you that God had in mind before you were born. That version has been trying to emerge your whole life. It got buried under some of the hard seasons. It got quieted by the language you developed coming out of your worst chapters, but it has not gone anywhere. It is still there, underneath the story you've been telling, waiting for you to finally start speaking in alignment with it rather than against it. To prophesy in alignment with your design does not mean claiming an arrival that hasn't happened yet. It means declaring a direction. There is an important difference between I am wealthy when you're worried about bills, that is denial, and the statement I am becoming someone who builds and stewards real wealth with intention and wisdom. That is faith. I am becoming. That's faith. One claims a destination not yet reached. The other announces a direction that has been decided. Faith does not wait for all of the evidence to be in before it speaks. This is literally what makes it faith rather than just reporting what you can already see. Here's what the daily practice of this actually looks like. And I want to be specific because I've observed over years of this work that people tend to respond to the subject with a great deal of agreement and not enough actual change. In the morning, before the email, before the news, before anyone else's agenda has gotten its hands on you, Take 5 minutes, just 5 minutes. Speak out loud, not in your head. Speak out loud where the old language has the most transaction. Out loud where you have to hear yourself say the words. Speak the direction you've decided you're moving in. Name the person you are in the process of becoming. Describe the life you are building, not in the future tense of someday, in the present tense direction of I am becoming, I am building, I am moving toward. Say it like you mean it. If you don't quite mean it yet, say it until you do, because here's something honest about how conviction actually works. It almost always follows consistency rather than preceding it. You speak first, the settled feeling comes later. This is the order. And I want to say one more honest thing about this practice before I close, because I think people need to hear it. There will be mornings when you do this and it feels hollow. When you speak the words and nothing inside you responds to them. When the declaration lands in a kind of interior silence and the old language is waiting right behind it with its long list of reasons why you're kidding yourself. Those mornings are not evidence that the practice isn't working. They are evidence that the old groove is still deep in your mind, and that the answer is not to wait until you feel it before you speak it. The answer is to speak it anyway. You speak it on the mornings when it feels powerful, and you speak it on the mornings when it feels like reciting words you don't fully yet own. The accumulation of both kinds of mornings is what eventually produces the shift. You don't get to choose which mornings feel like faith and which ones feel like effort. You only get to choose whether you show up or not. And the rest of the day, be a guardian of the forecast. When the old sentences reach for the microphone of your life, and they will because they've had it for a long time and they do not surrender it easily, you notice. You do not shame yourself for having the thought. You simply name it and replace it. One sentence at a time, one choice at a time, one day building on the last. This takes longer than a weekend. Anyone who tells you otherwise is selling something. But the change is real. It compounds, it builds, and it is available to anyone willing to be consistent and courageous enough to actually do the work rather than just agree with the concept. Because here's where I want it to land. I want you to feel the full weight of what I'm about to say, because it is the place that everything today has been pointing toward. Your mouth has been lying to you. It has been telling you that the ceiling you're living under is the one you were given and deserved, that the pattern you keep repeating is the one you've permanently confined to, that the story assembled from your hardest chapters is the most honest and truest account of who you are and what you get to have. Those are lies. Not mistakes, not misunderstandings, lies spoken in your own voice, using your own words about your own life, and you have been the one telling them. But here's the grace in that, and I mean the fullest possible weight. If your mouth built the cage, your mouth can open it. And the first step in that process would be accountability. Potentially working with somebody to help script that language for you in your life. If you're not currently working with somebody that challenges you in these ways, that makes you think about the way you talk about yourself in your life, then I would encourage you to explore that, whether it's with me or someone else. If you'd like to consider working with me, reach out to me. Let's have a conversation. Let's see what that looks like. You can text Greybeard, Greybeard, text Greybeard to 84503 on your smartphone. If you go to your texting app, all you got to do is key in 84503 like it's a number from a new friend you made, and then text the word Greybeard, Greybeard. Text Greybeard to 84503. And rest assured, my friends, I'm going to be back here same time, same place next week to talk more mentorship, coaching, and words you speak over your life. My name's Greybeard. See you next week. This is The Greybeard Show.
The Greybeard Show. Learn.
Build.
Grow.